Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual program. We are so pleased to have you with us today. We are going to be joined today by the Brooklyn Bird Club. My name is Cindy, and I'm going to be one of your hosts today. I'm going to be here behind the scenes, fielding a lot of your questions and sharing them with our guests. I would actually like to take us live and out to Prospect Park, where we're going to get to see Andrew Gustafson, who's our staff member. He's on the scene right now. And so, Andrew, can you join us?
Hey, Cindy.
Hi. All right, I'm going to remove my image here so we can see into the park and see you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. So I hope everybody is staying safe and warm during the blizzard here in New York over the last couple of days. So I'm going to be out in the park on the program today, and we're really doing this to show you some of the spots that our guests are going to tell us about, and hopefully we can spot a couple birds, but we'll also have some much better photographs so we can look at more closely at the details. But I also didn't want to miss an opportunity to come out and ski in the park again. So I'm going to be moving from place to place around the park on skis. And before we bring our guests on, maybe Cindy, we can just show the map real quick so I can tell you where I am and where we're going to be going today. So we're going to be in the southern portion of Prospect Park. So I'm way down in the bottom left corner at number 1. So we're going to make our way along the west shore of the lake, taking a look. And I've been out here now for about 15 minutes, and I've already seen 10 plus different species. So we'll make our way along the shore, and then we'll head up to the top of the map, number 6 at Breeze Hill, and then we'll end over at the Lakeside Center and take a look, hopefully see some birds over there as well. So that's kind of the plan for today. But like Cindy said, we encourage you to ask questions. And I also, we're curious to know, maybe some of you are very experienced birders. Maybe some of you are members of the Brooklyn Bird Club. Maybe some of you have just gotten caught up in the bird watching fever that has taken place during the pandemic, and you want to learn more. So we'll share some tips and ideas. Even if you don't live in Brooklyn, if there are places in your own community, hopefully you can learn about a few species, but also learn how to become an experienced and responsible bird watcher. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about. So I want to invite on our guests, Dennis and Bobby from the Brooklyn Bird Club. So why don't we start off? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Brooklyn Bird Club and what you guys do?
Well, the Brooklyn Bird Club was founded in 1909, and that makes us one of the oldest continuing community organizations in New York City. And our main focus is outreach and introducing people to the nature that's around them vis-a-vis birds, hoping to inspire conservation and a love of nature. And so our focus is bird walks in Prospect Park. We lead something like 300 hours of free bird walks that are open to all members of the public each year. And we do an additional 3,000 hours of man-hours of community service in the park to try to help maintain these areas for our feathered friends.
And how long have you been involved with the organization?
Personally, about a decade.
Me too.
Yeah, and so how did, maybe Bobby, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the organization?
So I retired about 10 years ago, and I Googled free activities in Prospect Park, and introduction to bird watching walk on Saturdays popped up, and I said, oh, that looks like a fun thing to do, bird watching. That sounds relaxing. And I met a lot of great people, and it became an obsession, passion, hobby. And I've been getting out there as much as I can ever since.
So why don't we start off? Because I know we probably have some novice bird watchers. First thing I wanted to ask, people may not think of bird watching in the winter time, but why is this an interesting time to go out and look for birds?
Well, everyone knows that birds fly south for the winter. what a lot of people don't realize is where we are here in New York City is south for many species. While our neotropical songbirds and warblers and all the sort of spring migrants head to Central and South America, all the birds that spend their summers in the Arctic tundra and the boreal forests of Canada, they're all headed here. And this is their southern destination for the winter. So you can get something like 140 species of bird in Brooklyn in February, whereas in June, during nesting season, you can only get about 85 or 90. So there are actually many more birds here now than the midsummer months.
Wow. So why don't we take a look at this this spot that I'm in, which you guys recommended as a good spot. And a couple of minutes ago, I was surrounded by about 25 birds, and now I don't see any, but we'll see what we can see from here. So yeah, we're sitting here on the edge of the lake. So what makes this a good spot to come?
Well, one of the good things about that spot is that a lot of people go there and feed ducks, and a lot of the birds come over and come close. So you'll be able to see them and, you know, really pick through the details. Now, that's not happening today, I can see. But also to the right, as you're panning there, there's an island that's very close, that's just in the right-hand side of the screen there. So besides ducks, we get things like cormorants and other birds hang out right there. So you can come out here and spend 15-20 minutes just scanning that and looking through the ducks in the water in front of you. Imagine all that snowy area is covered with ducks. We often think of the ducks as all like the mallards, which we'll see in one of the pictures coming up. But in reality, there's many species of ducks that come through in the wintertime. This lake here at Prospect Park is one of the few fresh water sources that we have in Brooklyn, albeit frozen now. You might find us some unfrozen spots later, Andrew, I'm not sure. But so it's really, you can spend a lot of time here picking through things and finding many different species of ducks.
Yeah, I'm going to ski over by some open water in just a minute. But, you know, we also have all of this nice forest behind us. And when I was sitting here before, basically all the species I saw were songbirds. So we saw some cardinals and song sparrows, titmouse, chickadees, all species that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, and hopefully get a chance to see maybe when we get to some of the feeders.
So that's a great point, Andrew. And when you turned to your left there, that habitat, another thing that's important is when you have snow cover like we do now, you will see birds like some of the sparrows kicking through the leaves, trying to get under the snow and under the leaves to get to a food source. So in weather like this, it's important, like keep an eye on the understory and see if you can find anyone kicking things up.
Yeah, we have a little song sparrow right here, getting a little bit closer. You can see it hopping along the ice.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. But why don't we talk about some of the species that we have on slides? And while we're doing that, I'm gonna hop on my skis and make my way to our next location.
Oh, great. Okay, so yeah, the American coot there is a bird that will spend the winter in the park. You can see them almost all the time. If you can see in this photo, the yellow feet hanging out the back. An interesting thing to note, if you ever see a coot out of the water, is that their feet are not webbed. They're just 3 toes, like prehistoric toes sticking out. They're very cute. And they will hang out with the ducks and that are feeding from people, but they are a more wild duck. You'll find them out in the other nature reserves, Salt Marsh Nature Center, Jamaica Bay, places like that as well. Okay, and then we have the widgeon. This is a male. This is a beautiful bird. So this is a more wild bird, but a few of them do come and spend the winter in Prospect Park eating bread and handouts, and they'll also forage in the lake. The lake is a good habitat in and of itself, besides the people handing out bread. What else do we have? So here's a cormorant along with looks like a ringbill gull. So the cormorants hang out on that island that I mentioned before, kind of to the right at the first spot there. There's some logs that stick out into the water. They love to sit on those and sort of dry out. Cormorants are kind of known for they just sit with their wings open to dry off because they don't their wings aren't waterproof, so they actually need to air dry. And let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so hooded mergansers come through the lake every year. We don't get a ton of them, but they're there. You just have to look for them. And Cindy, can you go to the next picture first and then come back to this one? Okay, so this is what they look like most of the time, and his hood is down, the duck on the right now, and here's the hood up. It's very impressive. And yeah, thank you. Yeah, that looks good. So to be able to see it like that with their hood up is really rewarding. It's a striking bird. Okay, are there any other duck? Okay, and these are the mallards, which are just the kind of the local domestic duck. But often when people are feeding them and people are looking at it, you assume that, oh yeah, they're all mallards, and that's not true. So it's a good thing to do, and a really nice birding activity just around the lake is just going through the flocks and realizing, oh, that one isn't a mallard. What is it? Oh, this one isn't a mallard. What is it? And Dennis, I think that's how you found your spark bird, isn't it?
It is, and to pick up on Bobby's point, one of the nice things about looking at waterfowl like ducks are they're very big, they're very easy to see, and so when you're first starting out, you don't really need optics. You can just look at them with your eyes. And so I did just what Bobby said. I'm like, well, that's a mallard. I know what that is. That's a swan. I know what that is. And I saw a duck I didn't recognize, and it wound up being a northern shoveler. And so, but that exercise of looking at what was there and recognizing there was something different, that's kind of what gets most birders really hooked and really interested in the hobby. So
we have a fefew questions here, and also in just a second we're going to go out live to Andrew at the second location. There was a mention about Tom wonders, is bread bad for the birds? And then there's another question, which is, where do the ducks and swans go when the lake is frozen over?
So yes, the bread is bad. You're not supposed to feed them. It discourages them from eating more nutritious things that they need. But people do it, and it does. You'll probably see some in Andrew's live shot here, and that and it does draw them in. But you really shouldn't do it. And then to answer the question of where they go is, well, as the lake freezes, and this is a good example, they huddle together, bigger and bigger groups of birds in whatever open water there is. If it's all gone, then they'll leave. They'll go try to find somewhere else.
And it's rare when the lake completely freezes over for a long period of time. There's usually at least a couple spots of open water.
We have a few more questions here. Jean wonders, is it true that the male mallards lose their colorful plumage and resemble the females in the wintertime or in the non-breeding season?
It's actually the opposite. So ducks are unique in the bird world in that most of them come into their breeding plumage for the winter, and then during the summer months they go into a molt and they have a duller plumage. So actually, for most of our native ducks, now is their time to shine.
That's so interesting. There's another question from Patty about ducks. She wonders, do the species of ducks ever crossbreed?
They do.
Rarely.
They do. Well, there are some that do more than others. So, for example, like a black duck mallard is a very common hybrid that we might see. But many of the others there are things like a pintail and a mallard cross and a shoveler, but they're much rarer. The closer they are in terms of their genetics and their habits, the more likely they are to interbreed. But it's not that common outside of the black duck mallard combination.
Yeah, so some of the species that I'm just spotting here with my naked eye, we definitely see some mallard and some Canada geese, as well as a coot or two we can see sort of in the foreground. Last week I saw a lot of northern shovelers here on the lake, but I haven't seen many this week. So you mentioned before, Dennis, that that's a species that you see sometimes, but not all the time in the lake.
They usually are here in the deep parts of winter, and they really depend on stirring up the water to agitate little crustaceans, little insects and things that are under the surface. And so if there's a lot of frozen area, you're less likely to see them. You're more likely to see them when there's more open water.
Yeah, we can also see in this shot that we have some other bird watchers with us as well, and lots of people taking photographs. So I guess that's another advantage of the winter, right? Is that they all have to congregate in the areas where there's warmer water and food sources.
Right, but the fact that they're all close to the shore like that right now, Andrew, you know, anyone who's just starting with birding, it's a great opportunity. You don't even need your optics to study them.
Yeah, yeah. And we can also see a pair of the Prospect Park swans. Can you tell us a little bit about the swans?
Can you, is there any way for you to get a little closer?
Sure.
Or
So do you want to feel that one, Bobby?
yeah, so there's definitely swans, and they breed in Prospect Park. You'll see them swimming around with their cygnets in the fall and through this time of year. There's an area that Andrew's going to go to a little. Are you going along the lull water, or maybe not? But there's parts whenever they walk along the ice, they're really comical looking. It's very funny. They walk and slide. So they're definitely a fun bird. Is there a specific question about?
Well, and these are, of course, they're not native birds.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that non-birders are always surprised by. They always want to show the bird or the swan and say, "Oh, look at the beautiful swan! Don't you love them?" And the answer is not really. Swans are an invasive species. They're introduced for their ornamental value, and the problem is they take away nesting areas from our native birds. So basically, every pair of swans you see nesting in Prospect Park, that was an area where a wood duck or a widgeon or one of our native birds could have made a nest, and that real estate's taken away by the swans, which really aren't native to the area. So it's one of these surprising things where non-birders are always a little disappointed when we aren't excited to see the swan they're pointing out.
Well, maybe you just spotted a swan pecking at a Canada goose, kind of pushing it away.
I saw that.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Cindy, do you have any more questions about the waterfowl?
Not specifically about the waterfowl, but there was a question if we could, to help orient people, to share the map again. So you're at number 2, is that right?
I guess I'm closer to number 3, sort of in between.
Okay, so he's sort of right here where I'm showing my cursor. Yep. Otherwise, we do have a few kind of comments here. Let me just share those with you. We have Charlotte, who said, "This has been wonderful. I have to go back to work, but I'll be joining the club." So she's going to join the club. And
wonderful.
And we also have Jody, who she's been feeding her backyard birds. She wants to know, how do they know when I fill the feeders? Also, they never seem to get their fill. They empty the feeders daily.
I think they're keeping an eye on you. They know as soon as you fill it, but they probably know that you have a feeder, and they come back and check it out, because when we put up the feeders in Prospect Park every fall, beginning of winter, it can take several days before the birds realize it's there, and then they mob it. but you know, they'll be the first and second day of the feeders being up, and you're like, hey, where is everybody? So they do have to learn that it's there. So if they're getting it the second you fill it up, that means they're keeping an eye on it.
And so would they be seeing, let's say, the goldfinch, American goldfinch? Should we take a look at some of the birds that she might be encountering?
Yeah, we can talk about some of those. Those are the ones that we had for up by the feeders when Andrew gets to Breeze Hill. But if you want to pull some of them up now for what Jody might be having at her feeders, yeah.
So that's one of our most common feeder birds we'll have this time of year. That's our American goldfinch. And you can see they look a little bit less brightly colored than we're accustomed to seeing them. So somebody asked before about the duck plumage, and I think that timing is more appropriate to birds like finches, where they go through a molt and they're a bit less colorful, and they're going to come into their bright yellow color with the nice black toupee over the next 8 to 10 weeks or so. So they're kind of eating, they're storing up their resources, and they're going to put on a really nice visual and auditory display for us very soon.
We have
What's the next slide?
we have a couple of questions. One is Cheryl, and she wonders where the feeders are in the park.
Oh, so you'll see on the map that we made, I forget which number it is. I think it's number 6 on Breeze Hill. Basically, Wellhouse Road cuts through the bottom third of the park. And at the top of the Wellhouse Road, where the number 6 is, it says Breeze Hill Drive there. That's a continuation of the Wellhouse. And the feeders are right there, sort of to the north of the parking lot. There's a really big oak tree, very large tree there, low-hanging branches, and you can see the feeders just over a little bit of snow fencing there.
There's also another, there's a question from Patty. She says, I used to have a wide range of birds, but the starlings are pigs and push everyone else away. Is there anything I can do about that?
Is this at a feeder?
Yeah, Patty, is this a feeder? So we'll see what her response is about that. Yes, she says it is.
Okay, so they're also an invasive species, but a lot of what you can do is you can kind of curate who comes to your feeder a little bit by what you put out. So if you're putting out that really kind of yellow basic bird seed you get like at the supermarket, you're going to attract lots of pigeons and house sparrows and starlings and some of the more invasive birds. If you want to attract more of our native birds, like the redpoll here, this is one of our winter finches, and they prefer to eat Niger seed or black sunflower seed. And a suet feeder is also great for woodpeckers and some of the boreal species. So when you sort of get that big yellow variety bag of seed that kind of falls everywhere all over the ground, you tend to attract more of the invasive birds that are trying to find their niche.
So while we're, Andrew's going to his next location, while he's doing that, would you like to kind of walk us through what we're seeing here on the screen and some of these birds?
If we have the redpoll up, we can, or do you want to go back to the ones that were just right after the ducks, which is what Andrew's on his way to now? That
sure. Oh. And you can also
just a few more after that.
Okay.
Okay.
You can also tell me which birds you're looking for.
Okay, sure. So as we're going around the lake, we did that. Okay. So yeah, so those are fine. I apologize. I thought those were in the feeder section, and they're not. So that okay. So I know why those are in this section, because where Andrew's going along now, he may not have seen it, but we have some trees. Some trees along the lake that have sweet gum seeds, like on them that attract pine siskins, goldfinches, and occasionally a redpoll. So I don't think he's going to be able to look up and see them there today, but these are birds that you can see right around a section of the lake with the beautiful, for people who are familiar with Prospect Park, these are the trees that have the beautiful red, gold, yellow foliage in the fall, and they can be swarmed by these three birds getting the seeds in the late fall and this time of year.
Bobby, I believe we have Andrew again, who's live at his next stop. So I'm going to pull down this slide here so we can all take a look at Andrew's screen. All right, Andrew, can you tell us where you're located?
Yeah, so I'm just sort of now at the northwest side of the lake. And so this is the shoreline you were talking about, Bobby?
I think so. Are you by the corner now, kind of by the?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to turn around. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I'm going to turn around in a second, and we'll go up. Lookout Hill is right behind me, and the well house.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is an area that often we'll see a lot of gulls feeding. The local flock of gulls that sticks around is similar to the ducks, comes in close when people are feeding. I see that you're not seeing any now.
No, it's pretty barren right now.
So imagine a flock of 500 gulls right there.
So I had a question, which is, this is a spot where, at other times of year, this is sort of a marshy area, and we do get a lot of marsh species. Especially, I know I see a lot of red-winged blackbirds, and even there are great blue herons that hang out in this corner of the lake. So let's say you go to a marshy area this time of year in New York, what are some of those species that you might see in a spot like this? Not that I see any right now, but.
Well, one of the fun birds to look for in the winter is the red-winged blackbird. The rusty blackbird. I believe we have a slide of that.
Yeah.
Up on the list of birds. And the rusty blackbird is a very interesting species for a lot of reasons, because it used to be one of the most common birds you would find in these sort of, basically anywhere you would imagine where there's kind of a wet mud puddle, kind of perennially, and some phragmites or cattails. This is a bird that really used to ply their trade. And they used to be a lot more common, but because of suburban sprawl, they've lost a lot of their nesting habitat. So as years have gone by, the numbers are going down and down and down. But luckily, a lot of these natural areas that we preserve in parks like Prospect Park and the Salt Marsh Center, there's an understanding that marshland is sexy now because it helps with storm suppression and keeping the waters at bay. And so we've maintained these areas for those birds. So now city parks are one of the places where it's really easy to see blackbird, and less so outside of urban areas. So they're a really fun bird to look for this time of year. And also the grackle, enjoy that area. We have a slide of the grackle as well. They have a similar foraging strategy, and they're looking for stuff on the ground and wet marsh down there as well.
We have a question from Sean about whether the rusty blackbird is related to the grackle.
So they're on the same limb, but not on the same branch. The grackle is a little bit closer to a corvid, and the rusty blackbird is a true blackbird, so it's related a little bit more closely to an oriole.
And maybe we can see a picture of a grackle, Sid. There we go.
And these are a really familiar backyard bird. There are a few now, but over the next 4 weeks or so, you're going to see streams of grackle coming in overnight, and you'll just see, a couple hundred of them inundating some of these marshy areas of the park in the weeks to come. And they have kind of a neat metallic sound and a really beautiful iridescent color. And they're just one of the birds, I think, that they're a little bit more sort of on this side of birding knowledge than common knowledge of birds, but they're easy to see. They're really very charismatic and, a fun bird to start with. So I know what the grackle is. Now I see something I don't know. What is that? So they're one of those kind of marker birds that are good to start with when you're learning birding.
I know grackles well because I've spent some time in Texas and I've been attacked by grackles. So
and they have scary grackle there. They have the great-tailed grackle, which can really take your wallet. So.
Yeah, I think I got too close to a nest maybe, and I got dive bombed by several of them at once.
Wow.
Yeah. Great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over this way and we'll take a peek behind the well house.
And
Great.
Andrew, we're going to show the map again, just to help provide an orientation to people. And so you had started over at number 1, which we can see here, and have made your way now over in the direction of now you're moving from number 4 basically to number 5, to where the well house is located, which has been beautifully restored by the Prospect Park Alliance recently. Bobby and Dennis, have you been bird watching your entire lives? How did you get sort of interested in bird watching in the first place?
Definitely not. I was always kind of aware of birds. I always tell people one of my earliest memories was I realized some gulls had a black head and some didn't. So I don't know what caught my eye. So maybe there was something there, but I was quite literally looking for a hobby I could do with my father. And I thought maybe bird watching we can do together. And so I sort of pursued it, and I really got interested in it. And he likes walking, not standing out. So he never got involved in it, but now I'm stuck with this. So that's kind of how I got into it.
And what about you, Bobby?
And sort of what I was saying before is I just looked for something free to do in Prospect Park when I had first retired, and the Brooklyn Bird Club, along with Audubon, ran these wonderful free walks at noon for 1 hour. It was called Introduction to Bird Watching, and the same woman ran it for over 20 years. She was just wonderful. She just really had an infectious enthusiasm for it. And I started going to those, and then got involved with the Brooklyn Bird Club. And there, besides the walks that we do during migration in the spring and fall, that Dennis mentioned, we lead walks during the rest of the year to other areas around Brooklyn, down along the coast. Brooklyn is surrounded on all sides by coast. We have wonderful habitat around us, doing all those weekend trips. And I, met crazy people like Dennis who were just out there in all weather and snowstorms. And I was like, well, these people are insane. And we, became friends with them, and that got hooked.
So maybe this is it's a good time to ask, what do you recommend to people who want to get involved in bird watching? Obviously there's great clubs that they can join, but what about equipment?
Well, I would say you don't necessarily need anything to start beyond a guidebook. You can look at birds at a feeder. You can look at the ducks on the lake without any optics at all, and sort of start there. But if you do decide to take that next step and buy a pair of binoculars, we're all involved in different sports and activities, myself included. And usually you kind of like buy the starter tennis racket or whatever it might be, or bicycle, and kind of work your way up, as your skill improves. Birding tends to be the opposite. If the difference between an inexpensive pair of binoculars and a mid-range pair is a difference between seeing the birds or not seeing anything. So I would say if you have any lot of good binoculars you can buy now for around the $300 mark, and you can get them cheaper than that used. And from that price range and up, I would say if you have any idea you might be interested in this, make the investment earlier, because you get a lot less frustrated. You'll learn a lot more quickly, and have a lot more fun than if you sort of, start with like a $19 pair off eBay. They just haven't the technology trickled down to that price point where those are useful yet.
And what about in terms of guidebooks that you each of you particularly like?
I think Sibley's is a great general guidebook to start with, Sibley Guide to Birds. And from there, as you get interested in any specific type of bird, for example, my area of focus is gulls. So I have like 5 different gull books, but a good general guide, I would say Sibley's.
I think more than that, but yeah, 5.
We have a question here from the audience, which is, has anyone seen any black-capped chickadees in NYC this winter?
I just saw
Yes.
one. I saw one like 10 seconds ago. I wish I could show it to you.
They are definitely here this winter. Last year, and I think the year before, they really didn't come down this far. They were noticeably absent. They're a good feeder bird. That's a nice picture. We should see them when we get over to the feeders on Breeze Hill, and they'll come in close. If when it's really cold and if they're really looking for food, if you put a little seed in your palm and hold it out, they'll come and land in your hand.
And we have someone saying that there are lots in Pelham Bay Park as well.
Good.
And we have another comment too, that the Merlin, someone has found the Merlin bird app to be very helpful.
So Merlin is a good place to start. And Bobby and I have worked on some other birding apps. We worked on Bird Genie, which tries to help you identify bird song by just by holding the phone up to recording. Here's a funny thing about algorithms with birding. It's really hard to sort of program some of these borderline things in a way that the computer can recognize what they are. So when it's good, it's good. And when it's off, it's comically off. We actually, it's one of the running jokes kind of in the birding community, how does it get from there to there? So it's a good place to start. It's a good place to maybe get an idea what family a bird might be in. But Merlin is far from gospel. The human ear and eye are much more sensitive to picking up on these small identification cues than the apps are right now.
We also have a question, since snowy owls have been in the news. Do snowy owls ever grace Prospect Park?
I don't think we've had a snowy owl in Prospect Park in the last 10 years, but there are many in Brooklyn. There are certain years, it depends on the lemming populations on the Arctic tundra. And when the lemmings have a bumper year, more of the snowy owl young survive, and they do a macro dispersion foraging. So essentially the parents kick the kids out to get a job, and they push further down south to places like Brooklyn. And so you will find them, especially in areas that look like tundra, like grasslands and big flat open areas, which there aren't a lot of in Prospect Park that aren't busy with ball games and dogs. But they are here in Brooklyn.
So Floyd Bennett Field had a boom of snowy owls. Was that 5 or 6 years ago? Is that right?
Yeah, that year there were more snowy owls on our Christmas bird count than chickadees.
Wow. Well, looks like we got a little winter wren right here. Yeah, and I know there've been obviously the snowy owl in Central Park, but they've also been at Jones Beach and some other places not too far away. Could you tell us a little bit about this spot that we're looking at? So I'm looking up Lookout Hill behind the well house. So what are some of the species we might spot here?
So there's a nice brush area there with lots of, in the warmer weather, you can see that it's like pokeweed and goldenrod and things like that that seed. And so you attract a lot of things like, well, this is a good point to mention. So there are sparrows and there are sparrows, right? The house sparrows that most people see around their sidewalk and their backyard and their feeders, those are a non-native species. They're actually a finch, even though we call them sparrows. If you look more closely, they have a conical bill and a forked tail. and they came over on trade ships over the last couple of 100 years. There are actually more house sparrows here now than in England. But a habitat like this attracts our Occidental or New World sparrows, like the song sparrow and the white-throated sparrow and the fox sparrow, and they're attracted to the little seeds that fall off these tall grasses and embed themselves in the dirt. So on a day where there's not a lot of snow cover, and I think we have some song sparrows and some white-throated sparrows on the slides, Cindy, if you could find those.
Yeah,
And
and why don't
so-
we look? Why don't we look at those? And I'm going to make my way up to the feeders on Breeze Hill while we do that.
Sure. So here we have a male white-throated sparrow with the really beautiful yellow lores. And this is a bird that makes its living scratching at little seeds that are just sort of below the surface. So you'll find those. And I think we have a song sparrow as well. So there's our song sparrow. And so these are our native North American sparrows. And they're quite beautiful. And they're quite interesting birds in many ways. And I think you can be a birder. I think you can bird your whole life just looking at sparrows. We have something like 16 species that could be seen throughout the year. And they all have these really delicate patterns and streakings that are all important identification marks that one can learn and sort of peruse to get familiar with the different species. But one of the most common is the song sparrow. Here's our Lincoln sparrow. He has a really articulated, inquisitive crest and the beautiful cream mallard. So this is a family of bird that, as it's kind of funny, as a birder, we kind of consider them maybe the next level up of knowledge. Like you have to get a little more, you have to kind of get at least waist deep into interest in birding to kind of want to get good at sparrows. And it kind of parallels in the old Lenape culture when Native Americans ruled the 5 boroughs. The greatest hunters were considered those that could come back with a bird like a Lincoln sparrow, as opposed to a deer or something like that. And in birding, the same, the kind of birder that can ID these really subtle birds. That's a real mark of skill, as opposed to some of the larger things. So these are birds you can look at a little more closely. The optics, I think, are definitely required to pick up some of these subtle details, like the dashing on the chest and the creamy colors. So they're really quite beautiful.
We have a question here about sparrows. There's a viewer that said, I find sparrows a bit hard to tell apart. Are there any tips that you have on characteristics to look for to identify them?
Well, going back to the conversation earlier about bird guides versus Merlin, one of the things I think about using a bird guide such as Sibley's is that it really does force you to look at the bird and pick it apart. So how is this bird different than the song sparrow in the other slide? Well, they both kind of have some streaks on them, but where's the color? How fine is the streaking? Is there a dot on the chest? There, yeah. So how are these two birds different? If you're forced to look at it and then read what the bird guide is saying, it will stick in your mind. An app is better for just IDing what is the bird, but if you just answer a few questions, you may not remember it. You're less likely to learn it. So, and the other thing is to really focus on the common ones. Every time you see a song sparrow like this one showing here, really look at it and take it apart. So then when you do see something that's different, when a Lincoln sparrow crosses your path, you're going to say, oh, that's not a song sparrow. That doesn't look like that bird I've been seeing all winter long.
And near where Andrew was, there are also gulls, right, that people might be able to see or find. Shall we take a look at those?
Definitely.
Okay.
So
now you're probably really excited.
Okay, not that one. We'll come back to this one. Okay, so this, okay, one more. Oh, sorry, keep going. Okay, here we go. So the main gulls that we have in Prospect Park at the lake, this is a ringbill gull, and there's also the herring gull. Those are the main ones we have all the time, and great blackback, those 3. Then these are adults in the pictures here, because younger gulls are very confusing, and that's a talk for another time. But okay, then we look for things that are we look for rarity. So you learn what the basic ones are that are always here. And I'm sorry, Cindy, I guess those didn't end up in order, but the ringbill, the herring, and the great blackback are common ones. There's the herring. He's different because he's a bigger bird and he's got the pink legs. And then the great blackback is a real big bruiser with black wings. So then what we do, now imagine this is the flock of 700 we were talking about, that was right in front of Andrew. You're looking through them trying to find out, well, what is different? So if you see an all white bird, we had the Iceland picture. This is an Iceland gull. So these are just absolutely beautiful. I mean, this is actually a young one, but they're beautiful. They're beautiful when they fly, and it will really stick out. You'll be looking through them and be like, "Oh, what is that?" And that's a real feeling of satisfaction when you find that. And then the first one you had, Cindy, where I said, "No, not that one."
Yeah, no problem. We'll pull that up. The black-headed gull?
Yeah, this is a black-headed gull. So again, this is just beautiful. Is the bill and the legs will really jump out at you, especially if it's in a flock with other stuff. You're like, whoa, what is that? That's a vagrant, usually from Europe. So we get them every year, but one here, one there. Similar like with the sparrows, like it's gulls are like kind of like a little geeky corner that certain people enjoy, but and again, it's like the tip for newer birders is start with the basics and learn those and learn how to rule out which ones are the basics, and that way something odd like this will really jump out at you. You won't just think it's a flock of gulls. You'll be like, what's that weird one doing in with the flock of regulars?
Right. And Andrew, it appears, is at the next stop. So we're going to go live to his view. And I think there are some other birders there, so we don't necessarily want to disturb them. So if you could kind of narrate what you're seeing or what we're seeing here.
So
yeah,
it'd be great to mention that these feeders are maintained by the Brooklyn Bird Club. Our membership finances the seed and all the materials that are used to make them. I know it doesn't look like much, but this all is not as cheap as it looks, as they say. And it's also done in unprecedented cooperation with the Prospect Park Alliance. This is the only citizen monitored and maintained feeder anywhere in the New York City park system. So we have special permission to have these here, and just for this reason. So people can look at birds like the song sparrow. You can pick him out because he has the longest tail of any sparrow by silhouette really closely and kind of learn these naked eye ID points of these birds. And so you'll see we have several kind of feeders. We have some of the traditional seed. We have some black sunflower seed. And we also have some suet and Niger feeders. And so some of the birds you could expect, I think we have some slides of the feeder birds, almost sort of the penultimate group of photos, Cindy.
Yeah, sure. We'll pull that up in just a second. Thanks.
Sure.
So we
and
have
that brush pile that's over there that Andrew's pointing to now, that's left on purpose. So that gives them shelter. One of the things about the feeders, because it attracts so many birds, it also attracts their predators. So raptors, hawks, things like that. So these wood piles give them little places to be sheltered.
So here we have a cardinal.
So this is one everybody knows. This is our female cardinal and one of our real winter feeder birds. Of course, there's the dichromaticism. The female has the duller coloring, so she can hide better when she's sitting on the nest, and the male has that bright color, I think in the next slide that we're all familiar with, to help him attract a mate.
And there's a female cardinal right in the middle of the frame right now.
It's not the same as being there in person, but it's still pretty wonderful. There was a question earlier on that had to do with sort of the preferences that different birds have for the types of seeds that they prefer. I wonder if you could give us a summary perhaps of a few of these birds that you feed and what type of feed.
Oh, they all just flew.
There's probably a hawk there. They all just scattered. So when all the feeder birds scatter like that, it's usually because there's a presence of a Cooper's hawk somewhere nearby. I think we have a slide of one we can show everybody. Let's see if he pops up. Okay, they're all coming back. I think they're okay for now. So the feeders serve two purposes. This is where it gets, this is our David Attenborough moment. And the seed feeds the boreal finches and the sparrows and all the birds you can see. But then the raptors feed on the birds that are feeding on the feed. So some of our local birds like the Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, they're a family of birds known as the accipiters. That's our Cooper's hawk. And these are a bit larger than a pigeon, about a 12 or 14-inch hawk. And this is your common bird that you'll see at your backyard feeder. And he's feeding on the birds that you're feeding. And accipiters are a family of bird where the wing is placed very close towards the front of their body, and it makes them very agile. So they can sort of fly in and go in all those branches and tangles and try to pick off one of those songbirds for their meal. So when you see the birds at the feeders scatter really suddenly like that, it's probably due to the presence of a bird, of a raptor like this nearby. Peregrine falcon is also a bird that can be seen in this area in winter, as well as the merlin, which like to eat songbirds and shorebirds. And we birders are fickle. So I talked a minute before about how we don't like introduced birds. The peregrine is a reintroduced bird. It's a bird that went extinct, and we've reintroduced it in urban areas, and they've really thrived because of things like the feeders and some of the shorebirds that we have at places like Jamaica Bay. So they're making a comeback. There's one that perches, I don't know if you know that big construction project, 626 Flatbush, just to Andrew's right. There's often a pair of peregrine falcons perched there that can be seen.
Wow. Cindy, how are we doing on time?
It's we have just a few more minutes, so it's
okay.
about.
So I'm going to make my way to the last stop because it's a little distance to cover. But this is such a wonderful spot to see. I had a question though, which is, could you talk a little bit about how what kind of behaviors the birds adopt to survive the winter, especially all these little tiny birds? How do they make it through the really, really cold weather?
So a lot of the birds that you see this time of year come from a group, it's kind of a colloquial name, hardy or semi-hardy, and they actually are adapted to this cold weather. They have no problem with the temperatures, and they also have, so here's something interesting. A lot of birds that appear omnivorous, they eat, like say for example, the finches will eat bugs in the warm weather, and they'll eat the seed in the cold weather. This applies to warblers and a couple different species of bird. They can only do that in that season, and it's an adaptation they have to make their digestion more efficient. So when they go through those molts, there's a hormonal change many of these small birds go through, and their digestion system changes from being able to digest an insect diet to being able to digest a plant matter diet, which is what they're doing now. So a lot of these birds can only eat these seeds and these sort of things this time of year. And then they'll go through a hormonal change when they come into their breeding plumage, and they go to the insect diet. So that's what a lot of them are doing right now. But in terms of the cold and all that kind of stuff, they have a really good sense for storms. Birds know when there's low pressure, they hunker down. So you don't really see a lot of birds when the actual heart of a storm like yesterday is taking place. Like the chickadees has he has the to find safety in that kind of condition. And then when they're back and it's not as stormy anymore, they come back out and they forage, and they're just really well adapted to it. Sort of the one kind of sad thing that for a lot of people we talk about sometimes is they can survive the cold and they can survive all these different things, but birds are kind of uncomfortable their whole life. Always a little cold, they're always a little wet. Gulls have mites, they're always a little itchy. So it's a rough living. Being a bird is a hard way to make it in this world. It's not easy. There's our tufted titmouse, another one of our boreal species that come down for the winter. They kind of look like a miniature gray cardinal with that really pretty rusty side. They're a really good feeder bird. And our white-breasted nuthatch. So they're really interesting. They're one of the very few birds in the nuthatch family. There's two species. This is the most common, the white-breasted and there's a red-breasted. They can actually walk down the tree. So the nuthatches, the black and white warblers, there's very few birds that can do that. Most of the birds that you see on trees, like woodpeckers, are kind of cheating. They're kind of latching on with their hands and they're kind of pushing up with their tail. But these guys have the strength in their feet to actually go up and down in both directions. So they're very charming. They got to have a cute little nasally. I'm not supposed to say cute. I'm not supposed to anthropomorphize them, but they're cute. They have a nice little nasally call. It's very, very charming this time of year.
So interesting.
And there's our downy woodpecker, probably our most common woodpecker. And you can see the photo on the left of the male. He has that little red spot in the back of his head, and the female has the clean white stripe in the back of the head. But you can see the male, he's propping himself up with his tail on that branch. So he kind of shuffles along a little bit up the tree. That's kind of how they do it. And there's our house finch. This is an interesting species as well. House finch, it's a native North American species and a common feeder bird, but it's only become common east of the Rockies in the last 75 years. It used to be that purple finches were on the East Coast and they used to breed here on Long Island. And house finches were on the West Coast, west of the Rockies. But sometime in the between the war, that era, they became popular as a cage bird and they sold them as Hollywood finches. And as you know, birds get out, people move, they let them go, people pass away, their kids don't want to take the birds out, the pet birds get released, and the house finches were really successful because it's such a similar environment, and they've actually outbred the purple finch. So this is actually the more common of the two to see here in the East Coast now. So it's one of these gray areas. It's a native North American bird, but not really native to here.
That is so interesting. And actually, Jody, who's watching, said she never sees house or purple finches anymore. So I'm not sure where she's based, but just an interesting commentary about both of these birds.
So a little further, purple finches have an interesting cycle too. They have a biannual cycle. And so every other year you get more of them. And it has to do with the fluctuations of how well the seeding pine cones do in Canada. So I think we're on a good year now.
Okay, Jody just said she's on Staten Island. Mike mentioned that he had a single house finch in the backyard in the autumn of 2020.
And that's our purple finch. So you can see it's superficially similar to the house finch, but it doesn't have that gray streaking. It has sort of this raspberry, it's more of a raspberry than a purple really, but it's got that kind of raspberry blush to the chest, and the female on the right there exhibiting dichromaticism with that really beautiful white supercilium they have. And if you go back to the house finch, you can kind of see the female house finch doesn't have that bright white stripe above the eyes. So it's another thing you can kind of look for.
Do you, as a beginning birder, do you ever, for people that are just starting out, how do you suggest they learn bird calls? Do you think it's best to be out with other people to kind of listen and learn together? What do you think about the apps where you try to find the sound that a bird is making? Do you have any advice on that front?
Well, Cindy, I thought you'd never ask. Uh, so, so, so the difference between bird watching and birding is actively looking for birds. And you can't really efficiently look for birds actively without knowing their vocalizations. I would say between Bobby and I, we probably know something like 200, 250 vocalizations of local birds. And that's a big way how we as bird guides find them. And so like everything else we talked about, like Bobby mentioned with the gulls and the sparrows, you begin by learning what you know. We all know a cardinal. We all know, what a robin sounds like. And so really lock down the basic ones that you hear, and every couple of years you can add something new. However, you have to kind of actively do it. So it's something like every year, I think you can add 4 to 5 new species, just sort of by osmosis and going out and live. But if you're really curious, you can contact us offline, and we have a technique that you can use that you can learn something like 25 bird vocalizations a year. But it takes a little bit of work. It takes about 15 minutes a day to do it.
That's incredible. Andrew and I, not only did we work together, but he's my husband. And when we first started dating, we went on a camping trip, and he could identify birds through their sound. And that was the first time that I had that kind of experience with someone who's so knowledgeable. So, yeah.
So
I'm dream. You got the girl with the bird knowledge. It's the first time I've ever heard of that. So congratulations.
Yeah. I mean, I had to learn about 100 in high school, and so most of them have stayed with me. We also have an old collection of 45s records from Audubon that were made like in the 60s that have bird calls on them.
So we worked with Tom Stevenson to develop, and he developed, and we teach a dynamic memory technique for birdsong. And just in a nutshell, the old way of doing it, you play the recording and it would go, Baltimore Oriole.
Right.
It turns out there's a plasticity problem with your brain when you have the spoken name of the bird in the recording. So what you need is the recordings without the spoken name. So it's just the song. And you do small lists of like 4 or 5, and you don't worry about the species. You use your own words to describe what you hear. So you might say, this song goes up and down. This song is one clear note. This song is a buzzy progression of 3 notes. And you just listen to that and make your own words. And when you have those 4 cold, then you add the names. The buzzy progression is the blue-winged warbler. The single note is the towhee contact call. That kind of thing. So you using your own words to describe what you hear, knowing the call becomes second nature, and the knowledge of the bird actually jumps ahead of you being able to verbalize it. It sounds really hard, but it's really simple.
Yeah. So it's not just memorizing, phrases like "Who cooks for you."
Yeah. Some of those mnemonics are really good, and some of them make us pull our hair out.
Right. And of course, lots of birds have extremely complex and varied vocalizations that can run into the, dozens or hundreds of different songs.
Right. So a good example of that is the Carolina wren. We all know that, to go to the mnemonics, it's the classic tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. But when the studies were done on its songs, it has something like 42 known common variations. So that's where things like knowing the voice of the bird comes in really handy. You can pick out a bird's voice. It might be singing an aberrant song.
Right. Yeah, I was actually just thinking that as I was skiing over, I heard the call of a red-tailed hawk, and then I only heard it once, but then I thought about it. I was like, could that have been a jay or another species that frequently imitates its call? Because it sounded a little bit off.
The jay always has that thinner, tinny sort of version.
But yeah, I don't know. Do we have the image of a mockingbird? I think that was a bird that you wanted to talk about. Speaking of ones with very complex vocalizations.
So the mockingbird, as we all know, is a mimic. and it can imitate all different kinds of birds. And it does some better than others. It tends to do sort of the larger, more full-bodied calls, like a boat-tailed grackle or a greater yellowlegs or some of those kind of bigger birds very convincingly, and it can fool you. However, one thing that the mockingbird does, that's always a giveaway that it's the mockingbird, is it will repeat the song 3 to 5 times. And it'll also often do a sort of playlist of 4 or 5 different songs that it repeats 3 to 4 different times. So a good example of that is I used to live over the Q tracks on Flatbush Avenue, and I was sitting in my apartment, and I was, it was a lovely late May day, peak time for flycatchers. And what did I hear outside my window? Rip, rip. I heard an alder flycatcher. And I'm like, I can't believe it. I hear an alder flycatcher outside my window. Rip, rip. And then I heard the boat-tailed grackle, the eastern phoebe, and then I heard the greater yellowlegs, and then they repeated 3 to 5 times, and I knew, oh, I just got fooled by a local mockingbird. So little behaviors like that too can be a clue.
Yeah, we have a mockingbird near our office at the Brooklyn Navy Yard that just will sit out there on a summer day on top of a light pole in the middle of the yard, and you can hear it all over the parking lot. It's amazing. But why don't we show this spot where I'm at, Cindy? Yeah, tell us a little bit about this habitat we're looking at. So I'm actually on the roof of the Lafrac Center at Lakeside. So this has this kind of sloping green roof, and part of the building is actually underneath this right here. But it's a green roof that actually has trees growing in it. So what makes this a special place to spot birds?
So yeah, so where you are right now, Andrew, that's all relatively new. That was all planted when they redid the skating rink. So that's all native flora. And so the advantage of that is that the native plants are what the native birds want to eat. So when you have introduced species of plants, birds may or may not be able to eat it, but this is all native planting. So over time, the hope is that it will attract native birds and it will just be a really good spot. It's been there for at least 5 or 6 years already, and some good rare birds have been seen there. The mockingbird that we were just talking about does hang out around there. It's a really good spot to see them. And then one of the pictures we just had up was an orange-crowned warbler. It's a rare bird. It's subtle. It's not as bright and dramatic as some of the other warblers we get in the springtime, and but it's rare, and it has a subtle beauty to it. We get them mostly in the fall. I would say 2 or 3 every fall, and this is a wonderful place to see them. I think they've been seen here every fall.
So we have a couple questions here. One is whether this rooftop is a place that everyone can go to, and the answer to that is yes.
Yep.
So when you go to Lakeside, there's a skating rink that's there, but there's also a pathway, which you can see Andrew showing right now. And it's amazing. This is a green roof that you're looking at here, even with tree plantings.
And we have these wonderful trees right here, these holly trees. Are these particularly good for any species?
I know that you see the mockingbirds around them a lot too. I'm not sure what I've seen actually eating the holly berries, to be honest. There's some of the other berries in like the botanic gardens and stuff like that, that I know like mockingbirds and even yellow rump warblers will eat. Not sure about the holly berries. Dennis, do you know?
I think some of the ornamental holly, no. We're not great plant people. You're asking the wrong crowd. We know like 5 plants, but they'll eat pokeweed berry, porcelain berry. So some of our more native wintering berries they will eat, but I'm not so sure about the holly. I think that's just on the Christmas card.
So
yeah. Or the cedar. You ever spot any cedar waxwing up here?
Yes, and those trees above, just behind the horse path there, we often get cedar waxwing in the migration season.
Mhm.
I just wanted to mention that we had a request again to show where you are. So I'm going to pull up the map. And then there's a question also about catbirds and whether catbirds imitate other bird songs. So while I pull this up, maybe that's something you can answer for us.
Well, they're a member of the mimid family. We have three common mimids on the East Coast here: the catbird, the brown thrasher, and the mockingbird. But the catbird, it doesn't really have the same abilities as a mockingbird does. They kind of do their own thing, and it's kind of a messier song, if you will. So it can be very variable, but they don't really do much imitation.
They will imitate a cat, though.
Definitely that.
Yeah.
And is it possible to see a painted bunting here too?
So there was one painted bunting many years ago. Well, not many, but about 4 or 5 years ago, a male, and it was found by our friend Kier, who left and moved to Texas. So the very last bird he found in Brooklyn was a super rare bird. This is a bird that you would normally see in the Southwest, in Texas and Arizona. And it was just beautiful. And this bird made the papers. There were people coming from, all over New York State, the tri-state area, to see it. And actually, it's sort of hard to see where Andrew is now, but there's a lot of narrow pathways there. So just imagine, groups of 30, 40 people trying to crowd in to see a painted bunting in those bushes right there, for example. But that was quite a special day.
Yeah, that was in 2015, and that was not long after this facility opened. And that definitely did get on the Prospect Park Alliance Christmas card.
So we'll need to wrap up in just a minute here, but Ronan said that they haven't seen cedar waxwings in New York. The last place they saw them were in Acadia. And also Ronan asked, can you see American redstarts in the park?
During migration, yes. Redstarts are very common during migration. They're one of the more plentiful birds we have. And what was the first part? Oh, the cedar wax.
It was a comment about not having seen the cedar waxwings in New York.
They're definitely around.
It kind of goes back to knowing the calls. If you know the cedar waxwing contact call, it sounds like a tiny police whistle. They're everywhere. So they're here. They just might be higher up and harder to see.
And for people, it sounds like we have so many enthusiastic people who are watching who might be interested in getting involved with the Brooklyn Bird Club. So could you share a little bit about that? I know we discussed that briefly at the beginning of the program, but we'd like to share some information just in case people are interested in getting involved with your organization and learning more about birds.
Sure. Yeah. So we're brooklynbirdclub.org. We're also on Facebook. We're very easy to find. And coming up in the spring, we offer 3 walks a week in Prospect Park. Tuesday, led by Bobby. Thursday, led by Tom Stevenson. And Saturday, led by myself. You can find all that information on our website. We also have a program series with incoming speakers. That's gone virtual now, like everything else, but we essentially have 1 speaker per month. All these events are free to anybody who wants to join. But if you do want to join, it supports all our efforts like the bird feeders and the Christmas bird count dinner, and pays the incoming speakers and all that kind of stuff. And members do get preference on trips that have a limited number. So like when things get back to normal and we do carpooling trips and things like that, membership has its privileges. So you will bump up to the front of the list when there's limited space. And it's a great group of people, all kind of age and ability ranges and everything else. So come out and see us. And, we're just here to give back the information that was freely given to us and hopefully instill an interest in conservation.
I'd really like to thank both of you for joining us today. Dennis and Bobby, you just have so much knowledge, and I'm excited myself to get involved and come on some of your walks. And we'd also like to thank the Prospect Park Alliance, both for the support of the work that you do in the park, as well as Turnstile Tours, where we have the opportunity to explore the history and architecture and stories of what it takes to maintain a public park in Brooklyn's backyard. Andrew, is there anything you would like to share?
I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for doing this. This was really
Mhm.
fun, and thank you to everybody watching for sticking around. I know we went quite a bit over time, but we had so many great questions, and I'll say the program would have been a lot longer if I wasn't on skis. There was some hard terrain to cover. There's still some pretty deep snow in the park, so but this was really fun, and I learned a lot of new things and some great new spots that I'm definitely going to check out more in the future. So thank you guys so much.